Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Civil Aviation Minister Suresh Prabhu inaugurated the Global Aviation Summit 2019 in Mumbai on Tuesday. The two-day summit with a theme Flying for All, especially the next 6 billion, is being organized by the Ministry of Civil Aviation in association with FICCI. It offers stakeholders an opportunity to explore, deliberate and understand how technology-driven innovations will change air travel in the decades to come. India is the 7th largest country by area and the second most populous with over 1.35 billion people. It is one of the fastest growing economies of the world and is likely to become the 5th largest in 2019. The Indian aviation market is on a high growth path. Total passenger traffic to, from and within India during April to November 2018 grew by around 15% year-on-year as compared to around 6% globally. India is now the 7th largest aviation market with 187 million passengers in FY 2017-18. It is expected to become the 3rd largest by 2022. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze how we can achieve our dream of becoming the top aviation hub in the world by 2040. Joining me on the program today are Ajay Dua, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Sanat Kaul, former Joint Secretary, Ministry of Civil Aviation and Chairman, International Foundation for Aviation Development, and Ganapathy Subramaniam, Chief of Bureau, Pudhiya Thalaimurai. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Kaul, let me begin the program with you. First, let's try and put into perspective and analyze and see where the civil aviation industry in India stands today.
Well, there is no doubt that the growth is excellent. It's growing very fast. And the fact that it's going to be the 3rd largest civil aviation sector in the world by 2020, according to IATA, but 2022, as you were saying, is likely to happen. We need certain issues which need to be tackled fast to ensure that our growth is smooth. And one major issue is infrastructure, where I think we are going to miss out on some things, because unless you have a good infrastructure, which means not only airports, but also air navigation management and so many other issues along with it, there will be some problems. Air safety, air security, safety in particular becomes a major issue in this kind of a scenario. The second thing which I think is very important is health of airlines. Now, airlines are growing. As you said, there's double-digit growth, but at the same time, the finances of airlines are not so good, largely because 3 factors I see. One is the rupee depreciating or not being very steady. Second, because the fuel prices are between 30, 40 or even sometimes more depending on the fuel rate of the airline costs. So that amounts to a lot of problems for airlines. And also that the capacity is being added in a very big way. A lot of airlines have ordered large number of planes and they keep coming in. So in order to remain competitive, they have to keep the prices low. At the same time, there is also a great switchover from railways to aviation by the kind of population which is just breaking into the financial acceptable limits of flying. So as airlines and air tickets and railway tickets sort of compete for each other, there is always a variation. So once the airline tickets go up, the passengers tend to switch back to railways, some of them. So that is within that scenario, we need to make sure that the airlines remain healthy. Our domestic pricing of fuel is very high and it's got a lot of problems, a lot of internal problems, and that makes for domestic airlines an expensive proposition. We also have a lot of infrastructure problems where airline slots, waiting, air traffic control, all these are issues which need to be looked into. And of course, terminals are okay. I mean, they can be crowded, but they are not such a major deterring factor, but there is a need to improve all our airports.
All right, we'll talk about all those issues, of course, infrastructure and everything else that you just raised right now. We'll talk about that in detail as well. But I want to touch upon or take a point that you're making a little further with the other panelists as well. Mr. Dua, there is immense potential really as far as the civil aviation industry sector is concerned, just like Mr. Kaul was pointing out. But there are problems as well, something that he touched upon. The domestic airlines don't seem to be faring well at the moment. We all know about what's happening with Jet Airways. There is Indigo as well, for the first time, which reported losses a few quarters ago. And, the global aviation sector, too, isn't doing that well at the moment. How do we address all of this? What are the challenges, really, and how do we address some of these challenges?
I think one of the bigger drags on the financial situation of the Indian domestic airlines, some of them even operating internationally like the Jet, is the fact that they have tried to make a capital expenditure on acquisition of new aircrafts, which was probably much larger than they could afford. The very fact that the order line for the new passenger aircrafts is long, is based on the expectancy of these domestic airlines that the traffic would continue to grow the way it did till, say, early last year. Thereafter, we've noticed that there has been moderation. It's no longer a 20% rate of growth in passenger traffic, but it's now much more modest, closer to 10 rather than 20. And that has, I think, with the cost of the money which they've borrowed or the lease costs which they are incurring, that's started pulling down the financials of these companies.
Intense competition as well, amongst some of these airlines. The rates are highly competitive if you look at them.
Yes.
Is that also a problem?
But that was expected. Once you've gone into a deregulated sector, I think the customer is going to demand the value for money. Where a relief they thought could be coming their way was that if there is so much of diversion of traffic from surface traffic to air traffic, rail, road to them, as was happening, that there could be also the aviation turbine fuel ATF, which continues to be priced very high. The moment the prices went up of the fuel, which have started moderating only in the last 2 months, a lot of these airlines took a hit. And that's what seems to have affected their liquidity as well as their ability to service the debts.
Right. Ganapathy Subramaniam, what would we like to achieve through the Global Aviation Summit 2019? What are the objectives? What are the goals, really?
The most important thing is to have a conducive environment for the growth that we are expecting. For airlines to keep pace with this growth, one, we need much cheaper long-term finance. Otherwise, cost of acquisition of aircraft and operating costs will become a burden on these airlines. We all know that Jet was one of the most envied airlines for its surveys and punctuality as compared to others. But now, look at the financial situation of Jet Airways. If this can happen to Jet Airways, why can't it happen to others also? So there is something wrong with the entire system that needs to be addressed. One, as I mentioned, is the cost of finance. Two is the infrastructure. Like, for example, for a long time we have been saying that a new airport will be created at Navi Mumbai. Similarly, Jewar Airport for Delhi, Greater Noida. The moment we have more infrastructure, the cost of infrastructure will also go down. Cost of financing goes down, cost of infrastructure goes down. Then the third component is the cost of fuel. ATF should be brought under GST. All petroleum products ideally should be brought under GST. That is being discussed for a long time. It's not happening.
That is a policy level change, so that needs to take place.
That's right. So state governments and the central government should make a concerted effort for this sector to keep growing at a good pace, say double-digit growth or 20% growth, because by 2030, Indian economy is going to rival the Chinese economy and the US economy. So which means it will not only be the passenger traffic, but it will also be a lot of traffic of goods.
There was a report in the papers today which suggested that India might overtake the United States as well by 2030 as far as PPP is concerned.
PPP,
yeah, in PPP. Yeah.
So which means our exports and imports will also grow exponentially. For that, we need a lot of cargo capacity also. So all these pending projects should be cleared at a fast pace, And two airports for a city is not, we see they're competing against each other, what will happen, etc. No. Well, if London city has so many airports competing with each other, why can't a Delhi or Mumbai with such a huge population have more than one airport? So all these things should be done. If the environment is good, definitely this market is ready for takeoff, and it will really grow at maybe why not 20%? Double digit is already there. 20% is achievable, provided finance, cost of fuel and cost of infrastructure all comes down.
Right. Yes, Mr. Dua.
I think the infrastructure, availability of infrastructure has to some extent be in anticipation of demand rather than being set up to fulfill a demand which has arisen. You see the airports around the world. For instance, Hong Kong, when it was built in the island, people thought, it will be excessive capacity, etc. Now they're already talking of where do we get an extra runway. In India, I think we wait for the demand to arise, and then we start planning the infrastructure, which during the interim period, whether it is the Navi Mumbai airport or the Jewar airport, we've been talking about both these airports, locations, etc. for last 15 years. And the work on new Navi Mumbai just started last year, and Jewar is yet to start. I see no reason why, when we are not going to be doing it through government expenditure, if it was on a PPP model as these are, they could easily have, let the call be taken by the private investor, saying whether he or it sees the demand or not, and that would have made things much easier. Second, what the government needs to be lauded for first is starting the regional connectivity scheme.
Udan.
The Udan, Aam Aadmi ka, Ude Aam Aadmi Bharat Desh ka, that kind of a acronym. But the problem is that in Udan 1 and 2, 134 routes which were awarded have not become functional, and these were awarded just to 2 airlines.
Right.
Air Deccan and the 2 airlines, Air Odisha. And Udan 3, which is now where the government is saying we will sew up all the mistakes, etc., which occurred in the earlier one, is basically out of the 84, out of the 130 odd which were awarded to just 2 airlines, 80 odd they just could not operationalize. Those are the ones which are coming here for auction, for rebid, etc. I would think that the regional connectivity scheme needs all the requisite support. The hinterland of the country needs to be opened up.
Right.
For far too long, we have kept it dependent upon rail, and we know the expansion of the rail capacity because of lack of surplus, etc., with financial surplus with it, has not been keeping pace with the
Changing
demand.
time, yeah.
So the way out, I think, is government is on the right track as far as the Udan schemes are, regional connectivity is concerned. I think a little more boldness needed for it to start building infrastructure ahead of the demand.
Right. Yes, Mr. Kaul, I can see you putting up your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to discuss another issue, and that is about the fiscal side, that aviation sector is heavily taxed, whereas the other transport systems like railways or buses are not that heavily taxed. Now, I think aviation is the hen that lays the golden egg, and therefore, just by taxing it more, you're maybe killing the hen rather than, making the thing look bigger. What I was trying to say was that we are at a stage where there can be a massive switch to aviation. The airlines are ready to take the load, and the railways can easily shed. Besides that, government does not have to spend on airlines. The airlines buy their own aircrafts. So there is time now to switch over in a big way, and that can be done by making sure that the fiscal side, whether it's taxation of the fuel or taxation on ticket, everything should be looked into, and see that the volumes, as volumes grow, the revenues are not going to fall, they're probably going to increase. So a rational approach to air taxation of aviation sector should be looked into. That's very important now. And it's just been going on. It was considered a luxury sector earlier. Now middle and lower middle class people are flying. people are flying long distance. So I think that has to be looked into very seriously to make sure that, everybody is able to fly. Second is about the regional connectivity scheme. I think it's an excellent idea, and as Ajay has been saying, we need to encourage it. Yes, I think these two airlines which he had mentioned have not taken off, but I think there is still hope. This will bring in a lot of economies of scale, it will bring in employment, it will bring in growth of regional areas. So I think one should not let it go. This should be pursued. The fund created for this purpose is also a good idea because it's not out of budgetary funds. The airlines had been protesting, but they have agreed now. So each flight pays around 5,000 rupees into that kitty, and I think it has a lot of potential, but it needs a lot of nurturing.
Right.
So I think within these two, then there is also India outbound. India outbound is doing very well. It is growing so fast that is faster than the incoming. And therefore, I think there is a need to link it up with our foreign policy also to make sure that, the growth takes place all over, and especially to areas where we have an interest. And that's where I think the future interest lies. The foreign minister has made a statement recently when I think she was in Uzbekistan, where she made this statement, and I think it should be encouraged too. So these are some of the very important aspects of aviation, but the financial health of the sector has to be kept in mind. It has to be nurtured and encouraged. I'm not saying there should be subsidy, but I'm just saying that the systems have to be formed. The taxation system has to be looked into and rationalized.
All right.
Whether it's aviation fuel or other taxes and fees.
All right. Yes, the External Affairs Minister did speak about it in Uzbekistan, in Samarkand, where she was for 2 days really for the first India-Central Asia dialogue. Yes, Mr. Dua, you wanted to add something?
Two things basically about, I think the capping of the airport slots is a good interim solution to meeting the infrastructure deficit. The airports don't have capacity, but a lot of airlines, and in particular I have in mind Air India. Air India has as many slots reserved for it at various airports in India as say Indigo, which runs far more the number of flights and carries far more passengers. There is no reason why, if an airline is not able to make ends meet, as we all know Air India is not, that it should be occupying the privilege which it had earlier of using infrastructure, limited infrastructure, which could be used by other airlines in the, that's one suggestion. The second one is again a good one, which is the Civil Aviation Minister mentioned yesterday before today's summit, saying the government has been working on an air cargo policy. I see no reason, if Air India is not able to find passengers or compete with the other airlines to get adequate customers, why it should not be concentrating on cargo carrying. There is a huge business in carrying valuables, carrying food items, as well as other high electronic items, and the world over that's happening. And the slots which are required for it then will be in the night, because the air cargo doesn't necessarily need to be carried during the day. It is possible to do that, but finally I'll come to is that do we need to keep Air India in the government fold at all? Because that itself could free a large societal, it may be government owned, societal resources which are locked up in its fleet as well as in its skills, because today one of the bigger shortages in India is of pilots, and the Air India has the pilots, but it doesn't have the passengers.
Right.
There are other airlines which are paying huge sums to foreign pilots. One report today said in the last 3 years the average number of foreign pilots is over 300 in India, and each one has to be necessarily paid what's the market rate globally. I would think that looking at Air India to be placed in the hands of the private people who could run it more efficiently and would reduce the resources which are locked up in it.
Right. You know, the final point that you raised about Air India is in a debate in itself. We can probably have another episode of the big picture on that particular issue. But Ganapati Subramaniam, you know, what are the biggest challenges really facing the civil aviation sector? Short-term challenges as well as long-term challenges that we need to keep in mind.
See, the long-term challenge is to really update on technology. I was reading some data about the number of aircraft that will be added to the Indian fleet in the next 10 years. It's about 1,000. So, roughly about 100 aircraft in a year. And some of it may be replacement, but some of it will be additional capacity. So, what we need to do is, these are all now being run on aviation turbine fuel. World over, there are many experiments going on to try and switch over to alternate fuel.
We had a biofuel flight, I think, recently.
Exactly.
Very recently, yeah.
Exactly. So, we need to look at those things also, because that is the future. Also, maybe how airlines use more solar power, etc., for not for their flying, maybe for other running their internal systems, etc. So, those things need to be looked at. And as Mr. Kaul mentioned, there is very important aspect of modernizing the navigation, so that aircraft are able to take off and land at a very short notice without wasting fuel. So, because you know, that will be a major saving for our airlines. And also, whatever planes they bring in, some of them may be small, many of them will be of mid size, and very few will be of very large size, but they should all be fuel efficient technology. So, for that, maybe the capital investment or the leasing cost may be higher, but in the long run it will really help. Secondly, over a period of time, aviation will switch to India. Aviation personnel will be from Asia, because you know, the cost is going to increase and increase. Like manufacturing, Europe and Americans are all now out of competition because of the higher labor costs. Similar will be the situation in the case of aviation also, because it is a service industry, service driven industry. So, therefore, we have a good potential, good future here to be a east-west and west-east hub. To traffic all around the world can possibly run through Hyderabad or Bombay or Bangalore, etc. Keeping that in mind, we need to create the infrastructure. Even if right now it looks, why do we need so much infrastructure? Yes, definitely in the next decade or so, the growth will be so exponential that we will be able to use it. So, for example, when Mr. Dua was there was a cargo airport project which was cleared in Rajasthan, but till now it has not been taken up. And if it was done and running today, it would get a sizable portion of the traffic from Delhi, which is held up here due to lack of capacity.
Yeah.
So, those things have to be, that foresight in planning will really help. Technology, fuel efficiency, and most important is going to be cost. Cost overall has to, for the growth of Indian industry and Indian economy, financial costs have to really come down, which is the difference between India and say Europe or China or America. If that happens, definitely Indian aviation will prosper. As far as Air India is concerned, I think government has taken a very bold step to move all the non-core assets to a subsidiary, reduce its debt and keep on selling these non-core assets.
Right.
If that experiment works, then that will provide a lot of surplus funds for other activities.
Sure. Okay, closing comments now from all my guests. I'm going to ask you to be brief as well. First, starting with you, Mr. Kaul. You know, the Vision 2040, that is, of course, talking about how India is going to be one of the leading aviation hubs by the year 2040. What needs to be done for us to be at the #1 position?
Okay, I want to make two comments just now. I mean, we have discussed a lot of things, but one is about cargo, which Ajay has touched upon. We declared unilateral open sky for cargo about 20-25 years back, but nothing has happened. Our cargo has not improved. It increased a bit. Why? Because we have to tie up with other departments of the government. If the customs don't cooperate, if the other things don't work, nothing is going to move in this country. And if the cargo is not cleared within a very short duration, there are alternate airports abroad where people make a cargo hub, like Dubai or Singapore or somewhere. And similarly about MRO, maintenance and repair facilities. All our aircrafts, our fleet of nearly 500 commercial, which is going to become much more, is adding on, are going abroad for major checks. And it's a scandal that, we should be doing it ourselves. It's a $1 billion business. It provides a lot of employment to young people, engineers and others. But all aircrafts, all commercial airlines are signing up with companies abroad because they are cheaper and more efficient.
Right.
Now that's a scandal which 3 or 4 finance ministers have also mentioned in the budget speech that they'll do something, but they've not been able to do anything. And that's a tragedy for India.
All right.
We need MRO, maintenance repair organizations in India, and we need to develop a cargo hub, but both these things require cooperation of other ministries which is not coming forward.
All right. Mr. Dua, what's the best way forward?
Involve as many agencies as possible in building the infrastructure, which means not merely the state governments, which is probably going to be mentioned in the policy, the new policy to be announced for air cargo, etc., but also private people in setting up new airports.
Right.
Depending up again, we need, I think, 500 airports in the country, not 100 or 150. The country is so large.
With a large populace as
yes,
well.
large population, large spread out. I'll just give you an example. Gujarat at one point of time, when it was still all closed only for the government, had the maximum airports, 12 airports 30 years ago, which were functioning, 11 or 12. And look at the Gujarat's development in urban areas, industrialization, which followed consequently. I think with much larger states also now there, 500 airport development should be our goal as a part of this 2040 policy, and we should let everybody come in to it. And finally, I think this policy should say that this sector has grown because of private initiative we recognize, and we will want to have much more private role, but of course regulated for purposes of safety as well as for purposes of affordability.
Safety is of utmost importance.
Rather than government trying to do everything and licensing it beyond the necessity.
Sure. Ganapati, close the show for us with your concluding remark.
Suggestion, apart from refining the environment and making it positive, government should also look at a clear policy for unmanned aerial vehicles, which, macro picture is okay. And the micro situation, these things will help a lot and open up a new possibility for not only airlines, but also a lot of technology companies.
All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.